Mr. Lewis, let's talk first about the Hancock resignation. Was Matt Hancock right to resign?
Well, I think, as he said in his letter, what he did was wrong. He acknowledges that he shouldn't have broken the guidelines, and actually he's ultimately taken view. And I do think quite right. He's thinking about his children, obviously, as we all will in a situation like this, and what they'll be going through, but also the wider country and the importance of not having a situation where his own personal situation is distracting from what we really all need to be focused on, which is the next steps as we come out of the COVID pandemic.
Okay, he was right to resign. You sound like you backed that decision. Why was he not right to resign on Friday then?
Well, my point is, I understand why he's resigned. I think he was also right. I think it is complementary, if you like, on a logical development. So he and the Prime Minister, I think, were both right to want to focus on dealing with the pandemic. And what we have to remember is we're in a unique situation in terms of a pandemic. We've never dealt with anything like this before. Matt and his team at the Department of Health, and there's an excellent team there, have had the last 18 months working through the pandemic, knowing what they've dealt with, understanding what the aims for the next steps are, where we are, what we need to do next, particularly with the vaccine rollout being led so superbly by Nadine Zahawi. And I think it was right that he acknowledged that, he apologised for what he has done is wrong, and wanted to focus on dealing with it.
Okay, but you'll understand, won't you, that the reason
Tom,
why...
let me just finish answering the question just very briefly. But I do think there is a logic to Matt taking after that 24 hours, then realising that his own position was distracting from that very work and therefore making the decision to resign.
Okay, the point I think is, isn't it, that his failure to resign, the Prime Minister's wholesome backing for him, declaring the matter was closed by Friday lunchtime, that has irritated a lot of people who put through deprivations, unable to hug very close relatives, unable to say goodbye to people who died. That caused real anger. Now, you're telling me, I think, that the Prime Minister just simply failed to see that anger, failed to see that blatant act of hypocrisy by Matt Hancock as the rule maker in chief of social distancing restrictions, because he was just too busy trying to get on with the pandemic himself. Is that right?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
What are you saying?
Earlier on today, I said earlier on today, I do understand the anger and the frustration people have had about, I've lost people I've known well over the last 6 months, particularly, who have not been able to go to funerals, and I understand why people will be frustrated by that. But that doesn't change the reality of a Prime Minister dealing with the pandemic, with a Health Secretary who has all of that experience and knowledge of the pandemic, and wanting to do everything we can to focus on the pandemic. But as I say, I also can see why Matt, understandably, and I think with hindsight, rightly took the view after 24 hours of seeing that his own personal situation was going to distract from that very effort.
Okay, so I think what you're telling me is that he was both right not to resign on Friday and right to resign on Saturday. But, Mr. Lewis, the problem with this is that people are now attributing false motive to the Prime Minister and Mr. Hancock. They just tried to keep him there, try to hang on long enough to hope the political stink went away, and it didn't. And that in itself undermines trust.
Well, I think most people, in reality, Tom, I've got to say, when I talk to people out on the streets in my own constituency across Northern Ireland and elsewhere, want the government focused on the matters that they are being affected by every day, getting us through the pandemic, continuing to see that 83% of the people having the vaccine, continue to see that grow, that rollout develop, and having our ministers and the Prime Minister focused on that. And actually, with Sanjay Javid coming in, we've got somebody who can pick up that work with a really good team at the Health Department now and take that forward. And I think that's what people want to see. That's what the Prime Minister's been focused on, and that's what we as a government need to stay focused on.
And I understand that, but I was asking about something slightly different, which is why this whole thing went on for 48 hours longer than it did. But let's perhaps move on from that.
I think it's because, I think quite understandably, Tom, people wanted to focus on dealing with the pandemic. But as I say, I also think with hindsight, Matt was right to take the view that he was distracting from that very work, and that's why he stood aside.
Mr. Hancock has now left his wife of 15 years, we understand, to be with his lover, Gina Coladangelo, who, of course, was advising him Department of Health as a non-executive director there. Should that matter to us, the voters?
Well, I don't know the ins and outs of Matt's private life in that way. I'm not going to comment on that. I think whenever we see a family break up, for any reason, it's always a tragic situation, very difficult for the family. And I, from my point of view, I want to respect the privacy of Matt's family, his wife and his children as well. And so I'm afraid I'm just not going to get drawn into commenting on the private side of Matt's life and his family's life. I think we should all let them have that privacy to be able to move through what must be a very difficult period for them.
Okay. Will there be a cabinet investigation into whether Gina Coladangelo's appointment as a non-executive director at the Department of Health, which she was paid £15,000 a year for, was an appropriate thing for Matt Hancock to have done?
Well, there are processes around non-exec directors. Obviously, I've got non-exec directors in my own department, and my understanding is the Department of Health went through those processes correctly, and those processes have been followed. And all departments and the civil service always ensure that we follow the proper processes, and rightly so.
But I suspect his relationship with her was not declared to anybody when that appointment was made, unless you can tell me otherwise.
Again, I don't know the internal details of the Department of Health, but I do know the department went through all of the correct processes. She was appointed following proper due process, and that is a matter for that department. And there is a proper system in terms of appointing non-exec directors. I've just appointed a few myself in the Northern Ireland office, so I do know that is a process that is always followed, and the civil service rightly ensure probity is at the forefront.
Understood, Brandon, but I suspect you're not kissing anyone in your office, and that is the new fact in all here. So would you like to reassure taxpayers that that £15,000 wasn't inappropriately spent, and this actually might be a nice opportunity to reassure the public that the system does work and therefore investigate it?
Well, as I say, my experience is the system does work. The Department of Health has been very clear. They've gone public already with the system was followed and done properly. And I can assure you the only person I would ever kiss in my office if she comes in it is my wife.
Well, I'm sure that's very reassuring to Mrs. Lewis, but I don't think you've answered the question about whether she was put there as a favour because she was his lover. But again, let's move on from that one. There was a CCTV camera in Matt Hancock's office. Is there one in yours, the Northern Ireland Secretary of State?
Not as far as I'm aware, but I work on the basis, Tom, and I have done for a very long time, that everything we do and say can end up in the public domain in one way or another. But the reality is, though, the Department of Health needs to look into this. There is a concern. Ministers and politicians generally, but certainly ministers working with the civil service, need to be confident that you can have the free flow of discussion that you need to have when you're developing policy, when you're working things through, and to know that you can have the confidence to have that private conversation. You have to be able to have it. I'm sure people understand that. So the Department of Health, I know, will be conducting an investigation to understand how this video image was able to get out in the public domain in the first place.
Well, I think there's a couple of things here, isn't there? That there's the fact that the video got out into public domain, the leaking of it, and there's the fact that a camera existed in Matt Hancock's office. Do you know yet whether or not that camera was there officially or whether it was planted by someone unofficially?
No, I don't. I've only seen what yourself and others will have seen in the press, some of the coverage this morning, making some statements around how they believe it got there. As I say, across government, there'll be security cameras in different places. Some people have in their homes to ensure safety and security in their homes. So there are two questions. Yes, they've got to make sure that if there was a camera there, that it was there appropriately. If not, how did it get there? And importantly, if it was a CCTV camera that was there for security within the department, how that video got out into the public domain, because all ministers need to be able to have that proper, open, free-flowing discussion, knowing and confident that that is a private conversation with civil servants.
Well, I think that's the point, isn't there? Because you're just never going to have a private discussion with civil servants or anyone else. And, for your instance, Secretary of State of Northern Ireland, some very sensitive security matters, if there is a video camera filming you all, because as we know, if something goes on tape, something gets written down, sooner or later it's going to get out. So would you be concerned as a cabinet minister that there are any CCTV cameras installed in any of your colleagues' offices?
I'd certainly be concerned if there were cameras that people didn't know about, and I think that's one of the things we've got to understand exactly the details of the situation of the Department of Health. I say that's a matter for them to investigate, and we'll see how that develops as we go forward, because at the moment we don't know the full details around that tape. We need to do that. But as you say, Tom, and as I've said, I think the reality is in public life, we all need to remember that pretty much everything we say, write or do can end up in the public domain, and that's something that should guide what we do with the best intentions for people across the country.
It's also the Wilson Doctrine, isn't there? I mean, this is actually quite an important part of our constitution, that nobody, security services, security offices in departments, should listen in on conversations of ministers and MPs.
Well, as I say, you've got to know as a minister, when you're dealing with difficult situations and sometimes not just secret, confidential, but just challenging situations where you've got to be able to have a conversation about what policy may be. You can be thinking wide, out of the box, blue sky thinking, whatever you want to call it, that ends up leading to really good, well thought through, sometimes debated decisions. And you need to know you can do that with confidence and have the privacy to have that thought process and that discussion. Absolutely.
There are some suggestions floating around Westminster at the moment that camera, the leaking of it, whether the camera was installed legally or not, or certainly the leaking was obviously not done legally, that was the act of a foreign state, espionage. What do you think about that?
I have no concept of that. That's not what I've seen reported in the press this morning. But as I say, I think it's too early to outline that. And having been a security minister, one of the things I learned long ago is not to prejudge things or be work through hypotheticals or guess what might have happened. The Department of Health needs to do an investigation to understand exactly what happened, and I'm not going to prejudge that.
Okay, let's move on and talk about coronavirus. It's still with us, of course. The government said it will introduce travel policy later this summer where the double jabbed will no longer have to quarantine on return from amberless countries. That was something that the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, confirmed this week. But he did also say that one issue that needs to be resolved before that double jab policy can take effect is the issue of fairness. Fairness for those who haven't been jabbed twice. Do you think that the single jabbed will resent the double jabbed if they go on holiday before them?
Well, I mean, different people will have their own views now, but I think that's one of the things. The point Grant is making is we've got to think about how we manage this, because there will be people who are double jabbed because they. I mean, I'll be upfront. I was double jabbed a couple of weeks ago. There's going to be a range of people who potentially have only had one jab, not for any reason other than just the timing of that. So it's not an issue that they've done anything wrong, and therefore we've got to make sure the system is fair. And also working through the details of what you do about children under 18, if families want to go abroad, if they've been double jabbed but their children haven't. These are really quite complex and complicated issues. So Grant and the team who are involved in this are doing that work at the moment. What he's outlined this week is, as we've tried to do all the way through the last period as we're rolling out of the COVID pandemic, is give people a bit of a sense of the journey of travel and where we want to get to as much in advance as we can. And that's what he's rightly done, to give that transparency for people, but also being very clear and open. There is still work to do on this.
I think the point is, isn't it, that it would seem equally unfair to stop the double jab from going on holiday just to hold everybody back so every single person can get a double jab. I mean, it's billions down the pan for the travel industry, for one thing, if you insist on being that pedantic, I suppose.
Well, look, there is that argument. Yes, that's true. There's also about making sure that we are balanced in the approach, that we take, we've got to take all of those points, exactly that point, Tom, into account to look at what's right, what's fair. Also remembering that people was, talked to Andrew Marr earlier on, he's had 2 jabs and had quite a serious bout of COVID last week. So we've got to balance that as well. But I would also say, Tom, and I'll take this opportunity as a representative of a coastal resort in Great Yarmouth, as well as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, there are phenomenal places across the UK, particularly in Great Yarmouth and Northern Ireland, that people can come and visit within the UK and enjoy a fabulous summer holiday as well. OK,
well plugged. I'm sure you'll get yourself re-elected off the back of that. Let's talk about a couple of issues from your own brief now. Northern Ireland, obviously. We have a deadline this week, don't we? At the end of this month, the end of June, something like Wednesday or Thursday, whenever it is, that grace period runs out for chilled meats going into Northern Ireland. It will be illegal under the Northern Ireland Protocol to import sausages, chicken nuggets, whatever, into Northern Ireland, unless you can persuade the EU to give you an extension to that grace period, which you've asked for. Are you confident you'll get it?
Well, I'm optimistic, but as you know, Tom, I'm always cautiously optimistic around these things. Look, we've put in and asked for that extension. We think that's a logical, sensible thing. The EU themselves, Maroš Šefčovič and his team have said they want to be, we all need to be pragmatic and flexible. And our point is, we've heard a lot about wanting to be pragmatic and flexible. Let's now see that in action. It is absolutely farcical that people in Belfast, Ballymena, Portrush, Londonderry, Derry, Londonderry may not be able to get their chilled meats from across GB like they always have done, that are no risk to the single market. So we think we've put forward a sensible proposal, something actually quite moderate, while we work out a long-term solution. And I'm hopeful over the next few days of those technical discussions that we'll be able to get that secured with the EU.
But we only 3 days.
Heard back from them on that.
No, you haven't, and you've only got 3 days left. So is now not a fairly decent time to reassure exporters and also the people in Northern Ireland they'll still get their British bangers after Wednesday if they want them?
Well, we've always been very clear that we want to ensure that we can continue to see products flow through. Look, we took unilateral action back in March. There was a big reaction to that. We did that because we were getting close to that deadline, and we wanted to do this in partnership and an agreement with the EU, but we have to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the UK. We've got another, as you say, Tom, a really good example here where we're coming very close up against the deadline now, and we have not yet formally heard back from the EU. They need to come back to us. I'm hopeful they'll come back in a positive way. There's soundings, and we've seen tweets from certain journalists seeming to say it's going to be a positive response. We've not formally heard from the EU yet, and those technical conversations are ongoing. So we do need to see the flexibility and pragmatism that they keep talking about. So we get that balance right about East-West being as important as North-South. And that's what the Good Friday Agreement's about, and that's what we should all be focused on.
OK, when I last spoke to you on this programme, we discussed the government's response to end vexatious prosecutions of the British Army veterans of the Northern Ireland's troubles. Now, it's a government manifesto promise to act on this and with some urgency. We spoke, you and I, last on the 4th of October last year, and let me just play you what you told me then.
I do intend, and I'm still looking to bring forward legislation to deliver on that for Northern Ireland and for veterans who served in Northern Ireland before the end of this year.
Mr. Lewis, the end of this year in that sentence was the end of 2020. You'll know as well as I do, we're now halfway through 2021, and yet there is still no CITES legislation. So when's it coming?
Yeah, look, that's a very fair point, Tom. And I think that's a very fair challenge as well. Look, the reality is that apart from COVID, and I'm not going to deny COVID has had a big impact on our ability, particularly last year, to engage with a whole range of interested parties. Because when we do bring forward the legislation, which we will do, and as I outlined just on Thursday this week, we've had a big step forward. The Irish government has joined us in a process of talks over the next few weeks with a view to legislating later this year in the autumn. I want to be able to come forward before we break for summer recess with an outline of what the government's looking at for parliamentarians and the public more widely. This is a very complex area. It's actually about helping Northern Ireland move forward, making sure that victims, information recovery, truth and reconciliation are absolutely at the heart of what we do and delivering, and we absolutely will deliver on that manifesto page. The Prime Minister, I have been very clear about that, the Secretary of State for Defence. We've all been very clear about that focus. But we've got to make sure this is something that works for all of Northern Ireland and has that focus on truth and reconciliation. We've seen in just the last few weeks a couple of clear, been well covered in the public domain, cases and the Ballymena inquest that have shown that the current system doesn't work for anybody.
We've known that for a while, haven't we, Mr. Lewis? That's the point. That's why I keep on asking about this. You very kindly just, one second, let me answer this question. You've very kindly just given us another date before the break for the summer recess to learn the government's plans. It's expected to be some sort of equal treatment of both IRA, terrorists and British Army soldiers. There'll be some limit of statute of limitations potentially. You'll tell us more before the end of the summer recess. By my count, it's about 3 weeks' time. But just until then, do you accept that we currently have a two-tier veteran policy? Effectively, veterans from foreign wars who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're largely exempt from legacy prosecutions, but veterans in Northern Ireland currently aren't.
Well, no, I don't accept that, actually. And I would also say, Tom, it's a very, very different situation. Obviously, our armed forces, and it's not just our armed forces, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing by people who served right across the RUC and elsewhere, who are working in a very, very different legal context. This is a hugely complicated area, which is why this is something that's right. We take the time to make sure we go through this methodically, we get it right, and it's about our veterans, but it's also about the people of Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland's ability to move forward. As I say, information recovery, people waiting 50 years for information on what happened is just not good enough. We've got over 1,000 deaths, the majority of which are at the hands of terrorists that are unsolved. We've got to have a system that gets the truth for people in a much better way than what we've seen in the past, because what's currently there isn't working for anybody, and we're determined to rectify that.
We discuss this regularly again. I hope we don't discuss it for another time. Caroline's got a question for you.
Hi, Mr. Lewis. I'm just wondering, you had preliminary discussions with Michael Gove, I understand, earlier this year about the prospect of giving excess vaccines to Ireland once all adults in the UK have received their first dose. With that goalpost now looming, what's the prospect for that becoming a reality?
Well, look, the Foreign Secretary and the team of the Health Department and the Prime Minister all said, look, we want to make sure that everybody around the world gets vaccinations in good time. We've obviously got to make sure we are, as a government, delivering for people across the UK. We work with our partners, and I know there's a whole range of issues around things like that the Department of Health, the team of Michael Gove's team and the Foreign Secretary are looking at in partnership with our friends and partners around the world, including the EU, and obviously that includes the Irish government as well.
Yeah, and thinking about our relations with other world countries, they were meeting at the G7, obviously, earlier this month. There was the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which I'm sure you'll be aware of. I know that you've got really good links with the Democrats. I just wonder, at the moment, given what President Biden's position appears to be about the fear that there's going to be a sort of reneging on the Northern Ireland Protocol, how would you characterise relations with the Americans at the moment?
Well, actually, I disagree with the description of the G7 account, I've got to say, because I've obviously got readouts of what happened there. I think, but first of all, the position of the US has always been very clear, and it's not about the Northern Ireland Protocol, it's more about the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. They stand absolutely in lockstep with us in our determination to ensure that is absolutely delivered on, and that is obviously a key focus for us. We respect the EU's focus being on the single market, but for us and the US, it is on that Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all of its strands, North-South, Northern Ireland and East-West as well. And that's where we're absolutely in lockstep with them. They obviously want to ensure that we continue to focus on that, and as I say, we are partners in doing that. The Americans played a large part in the peace and prosperity of Northern Ireland over the last few years, but obviously they also understand for the UK government it's an integral part of the UK, and they want to work with us and the people of Northern Ireland to see a prosperous and peaceful future as well.